Folks, what God gave in saving His people was the most God could give. There was nothing left beyond or above, nothing better, nothing more noble, nothing more precious, nothing of higher value, nothing of greater importance. God gave His own Son. Paul's expression in 2 Corinthians is the only one suitable. Thanks be to God for His unspeakable gift. And for a moment, just move your thoughts away from the worth of Christ to the affection God had for Christ and has for Christ and will always have for Christ. This is my beloved Son, with whom I'm well pleased. Boy, we read that. Have you ever let your mind just soak there for a while? This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. You know, this verse abounds with love and pleasure. If you will let your mind run with this verse, you can fall back and back and back into the very past depths and ages of eternity, and you can see there, however in your mind you perceive of the persons of deity, but you can see them there, and there is a fire of passion spilling back and forth between these two persons, delighting, rejoicing, Father to Son, Son to Father. I mean, literally, God in ecstasy, swimming in eternal pleasure, totally gratified in each other's perfections and beauty. I mean, they are ravishing each other and being ravished. If we can talk on terms like that with a man and a woman, I mean, these two persons full of joy and jubilation and merriment and content and complete, along with the Spirit of God, completing all these triune perfections of love and fellowship, endless ages, unhindered, always abounding, wave after wave, back and forth, constant and uninterrupted, hearts desiring one another, overflowing on every hand, perfect satisfaction in that relationship. It's not that God did not spare the guy over there that He doesn't care about. It's not the guy over here that was expendable and dispensable. God did not spare His own Son. The Son of His own love, the Son of His affections. God gave not only what was more valuable than all other things put together, He spared not the object that tugged hardest on His eternal affections. But don't we even need to go further than that? Don't we need to ask, what in the world does it mean that God spared not His Son? Spared Him not from what? This is exactly where the full weight of Paul's argument in Romans 8:32 should especially grip us. God didn't spare His own Son from what? He didn't spare Him from the dreaded cup. My Father, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as You will. We know what was in that cup. Every sinner who dies without Christ drinks that cup. Its contents are described in horrific reality in Revelation 14:10. God's wrath poured full strength into the cup of His anger. There's the cup of His anger. What's in it? Full strength, wrath. There He is lying prostrate in the garden. Father, He recoiled from this thing. Father, take this cup. Please take this cup. If only it might be Your will to do so. Please, Father, take this cup away. He whose worth surpasses the most glorious constellations and mountain ranges and lakes and sun and moon and men and women and children, animals, plants, forests, meadows. He who is the pleasure of pleasures to his Father, and he pleads to be spared. Father, deliver me from this cup. Here it is, folks. This is the greatest obstacle of all standing in the way of man's salvation. Would God, could God, might God be willing to do the inconceivable? Is God willing not only to let His Son suffer unimaginable anguish, but to suffer it at His very own hands? What would He really do? Would He do that? Could He do that? Could God do such a thing? Could God will that His dearest Son be ground beneath the grinding stone of His own wrath? Father, please remove this cup. Please let it pass from me. Father, please spare me. But let it be according to your will. And what was the Father's will? Would God spare His Son or not? Would He give Him up or not? Because if He would, our good could never be stopped. Once the greatest obstacle of all were overcome, once the Son of God were given, once the supreme sacrifice was made, every other obstacle would be minor. Everyone would be secondary and inferior. The will of God to spare His Son or not would show His will with regards to every other thing for you. And what was the Father's will? Isaiah holds his breath. He says it was the will of God to crush Him. His own Father forced the cup to His lips and made Him drink. And I'm not saying that Christ did not willingly give Himself. He did. But even in that, there was a recoiling at the horror of what it would cost to really pay for men's sins. He forced that cup to His lips and made Him drink, and what came out of that cup tore through every fiber of His being. It crushed and tortured miseries unspeakable. God did not spare His own Son. My brothers and sisters, we praise God He did not spare Him. That brings us to Paul's argument. If that's true, what does that mean for us? He who did not spare His own Son but gave Him up for us all, how will He not also with Him graciously give us all things? How, brethren? How? That's the question. God laid it all on the table when He offered His only begotten Son. Can you see that? Now how will He not with Christ freely and gladly and graciously give us all things? I'm sure you can see this is the most basic argument in the world. It only stands to reason that it should be so. There's no clearer logic to be found. But hold on. Even though on the one hand, there is no clear logic, on the other hand, this verse actually defies logic. Look, if one of my children were kidnapped, taken hostage, and I was willing to give $1 million for their return, you know, you don't really have to ask me whether or not I'm willing to give $10 to get my child back. That's a given. God gave us the $1 million deal when He gave us His Son. So you really don't need to ask whether or not He's willing to spend $10 for you. It's obvious what the answer is. It's logical. It makes sense. But my brethren, there is something here that just doesn't seem to make any sense at all. Back in Romans 3, Paul declares a truth that none of us can run from. And I'll tell you exactly what he says. When God looks out across the scope of mankind, all of man, all the sons of Adam, and He looks at them and He sizes up their worth. Do you know what His estimate of mankind is? Worthless. All of them. Put together. Worthless. Brethren, if I give $1 million to get my kidnapped child back, that makes sense. That's logical. Any loving parent would do that. And if I would give that amount, then it's logical I would be willing to give any lesser amount.